This is Mindset for Success with your host, Dr. Leslie Knudsen. Each week, she will interview women entrepreneurs to explore the unconscious psychological struggles they faced as they build their businesses and how they overcame them. Here's your host, Leslie Knudsen.
I'm happy to welcome our distinguished guest today, Joanna Bloor. Joanna's mission is to help us prepare for the big leap into the working future. Joanna spent her early career scaling and building brands like Ticketmaster, OpenTable, and Pandora. Known for building teams, infrastructure, and revenue strategies, Joanna did so in environments where there were no rule books, no precedents of how things should be done. Her new journey led to a fateful conversation in line at the TED 2016 conference that planted the idea that every one of you is awesome and that we just need to tell everyone else. Thank you, Joanna, for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So as you know, it takes a lot to be a successful entrepreneur, and business acumen is key. But we rarely talk about the psychological challenges that women often face to achieve that success. I refer to these as those negative and sometimes persistent thoughts that create doubt, undermine success, and destroy self-confidence and risk-taking. Can you tell us, Joanna, a little bit about your colorful history and the seismic shift you experienced moving from the UK to the US with your family when you were a young teenager? I can imagine that it might have been difficult at first to be the outsider with a fabulous accent.
That was really the big shift in my life. When you think about all of the conversations one has in one's head about being an entrepreneur and moving forward, that really taught me at a very young age that nothing was actually super scary. Just to give your listeners a little background, I, at 15, moved from southern England to central Texas. And just to frame it a little bit visually, I describe it as from going to school at a place that was basically like Hogwarts without boys or magic, to Friday Night Lights, and all of the delightful stereotypes that existed there. And while I absolutely didn't have the language for it at the time, and there was also a ton more going on that impacted this, what I learned very quickly was that all of the rules I thought were the rules, other than the don't hurt somebody or don't be mean, which are kind of the same thing, no longer applied. And that I had to learn an entirely new rule book for everything from building relationships to dating, to being a student, to language, although technically we spoke the same language, we did not, to everything in between. And while it was constantly terrifying because I made a spectacular number of mistakes. Some of them were hilarious and some of them were not so hilarious. It really built the muscle of experimentation, empathy, understanding my audience, understanding how important relationships were to me in such a way that a normal 15-year-old, I don't think would, because at 15, you're just trying to figure out who you are. And figuring out who you are in a world of spectacular ambiguity was kind of an added stress. Now, lucky for me, I thought everything about Texas was hysterically funny most of the time. And I had also been spectacularly lucky in getting a ridiculously good education in the UK, and so was able to skate a tiny bit at the beginning, which gave me the room to experiment with who is it I wanted to be and what was I going to do. And that lesson has really followed me throughout my entire life and has made me much more excited to lean into ambiguity and to be equally empathetic about the fact that the people that I'm talking to might have a different perspective or a different language, and that building something new from the ground up is super fun, and means that you get to decide who you want to be and what you're all about.
For the difficult times, were there any? And if so, how did you kind of learn? Right? Did you skate by on that too? And if so, what have you sort of brought into your life from that period?
Well, I mean, this is what I think is true about everything. Is it, there were absolutely difficult times then. My dad stayed in the UK. My dad and my entire network stayed in the UK, including my older sister, who was very much a part of my guide in how to navigate life. So I suddenly became the big sister. But I would also say that wasn't just as a teenager. When you move into adulthood and suddenly realize that the only person you can truly rely on is you, you go through those same stages. And I openly admit that while I had a lot of fun and did okay, I was a bit of a mess for the first 5 years of my 20s because I was just trying to survive. And when you have that limitation of, can I pay rent? How am I going to put food on the table? All of the what I call the Maslow's hierarchy of needs things, they can be fantastically distracting and in many, many ways. And it means that you have less comfort with really leaning into who you are and what you're all about, which I know lots of people talk about in authenticity and how important it is. I'm not sure that's the right word, but being true to yourself, you're in kind of a state of fear all the time.
Right.
But once you get out of that, then that same leaning into ambiguity professionally. So you mentioned in my introduction that I worked with a lot of startups. I was a self-described startup junkie for 25 years. I got to go through 4 IPOs, which was amazing. But every single one of them required me to experiment, color outside the lines, meet people who didn't think the same way that I did, all of those sorts of things. And I don't think there was ever one time that voice in my head didn't go, have you lost your mind? What are you doing? And quite frankly, people around me who would say, have you lost your mind? What are you doing? And the almost, I don't want to be over dramatic here, but the battle that rages in your head between your desire and ambition to color outside the lines, to be different, to really lean into where you're being called forward, and the judgment monster who goes, no, how dare you? Absolutely not. They are going to judge you, is a battle I have waged, well, I think most of my life, but I think it's also a battle everybody wages their entire life. But I still, I had the conversation with myself this weekend and woke up Monday morning and was like, okay, we are back on the future you. We are going to tap into the ambition, and the don't be a jerk message is always there, but otherwise keep plodding forward.
So you get back on track by encouraging yourself to look forward.
Oh, yes. There's an enormous amount of self-chat about who could the future you be if you said yes to her. Always a lot of self-chat. I'm also a big, big, big fan of mathematics and science. It's a novel concept these days, because I learned the other day that the amygdala is wired to be 70% negative, which when I got math and science thrown at me that way, I was like, oh, well, hang on a second. That means that 70% of the chit-chat that's coming in my own head to me, because that's what the amygdala does, right, is negative. And ergo, I'm being a jerk to myself 70% of the time. So I need to make an effort to be nice to myself at least an extra 20% of the time to make up, so at least I'm on an even playing field. Like, I think the jerk can be helpful and it also could be hinderous, but it should be, one should be intentful about how one talks to it and whether you listen. And so I'm super active almost every day in telling my own self how much of a genius I am and how much of a good idea something is, which makes me sound, see, listen to you, this is the judgment monster coming out almost immediately going, oh my God, Joanna, I can't believe you just said that about yourself. You're a genius. And I'm like, yes, I am. But I also come back and say, like, why I am obsessed with this idea of the future you and why I do the work that I do is so often we allow that voice to say, how dare you know? And what it's doing is saying, do not share your ideas. And as a human being on this planet, that is what we are. That is our alchemy. That is our magic. That is the thing that we have to share with people. And I go, the other conversation we should have with ourselves is don't be such a selfish jerk as to keep your ideas to yourself. Because how do you know that it's not going to have an enormous impact on somebody else? And that version of the negative chit chat is a really good reminder, I think, to me of, look, you've been told multiple times that you have some really great ideas by other people, and you're being selfish by not sharing it with others. There's a lot of chat.
No wonder you do what you do. Fairy godmother to the executives who want to live up to their potentials.
Yeah.
No wonder. Tell me a little bit about when you, I think this was 11 years ago, when you became an entrepreneur, 12.
No, not even. It was only
5 years ago.
Yeah, and the reason you're confused with the dates is I think when I talk about myself, I joke about how there's been a baby entrepreneur inside me since I was little. My mom reminded me the other day that at 6, I got into an enormous amount of trouble at school because I learned how to use barter to get things I wanted that other people had. Colored pencils, somebody else's lunch didn't matter. And apparently that was not so good. But apparently that little entrepreneur has always been inside me. But 5.5-ish years ago, I had just come to the end of one of my career adventures. And that one was at Pandora. And I do think, like, this is the lesson that, or at least the story we are telling all of ourselves all the time, is that, you're supposed to find the one thing that lasts forever. And I go, even as an entrepreneur, you date an opportunity, you do not marry it, which means that there is going to be a beginning and an end. And I had come to the end of my role at Pandora, and a couple of things had happened. One, I had really had the opportunity to build out my dream vision for the role I had in the company, not only on the technical side and the kind of the product side for what it is, but also on the human side. My team there had gone from 30 to 400 in a little over 3 years. It was really their big hockey stick moment. And I had said on my very first interview with the CEO that within the area of my expertise, that building a team where humans came first was critically important to me. Fortunately, I found a leadership team who were like, yes, us too. And they supported that. And so in taking a team and growing it that fast, I had learned a spectacular amount of lessons about humans in the workplace and how they thought and what was the answer to the question of why does my work matter and why is that important to me? In conjunction, I had been invited to join this group of other, it was about 13 other women who were all women in technology, who were all executives at companies in Silicon Valley area, around this question of, do you have a platform and are you known? Because in the world of venture capital, what you are known for, when it comes to funding,